On this episode of the Karen Kenney Show, we're talking about what do you do when you live in a world where there's just so much bullshit? And stay tuned to find out. Hey, you guys. Hey, welcome to the Karen Kenney Show. Hey, welcome to the Karen Kenney Show. Oh my gosh, yes. I'm so excited to be back. It has felt like forever. It's only been 2 months, 8 weeks. I took a little pause, I took a little break, and we're back though. And I gotta say, I'm gonna say a couple of things and we're gonna dive into today's episode all about why I'm calling bullshit and what we can do about it. Okay. So first of all, thank you so much for those of you that wrote to me and told me you missed the show and that you were super duper excited that it was coming back. Me too. I'm so excited that it was coming back. The first couple of weeks not doing a show, it was wicked weird. And those of you who are loyal listeners, first of all, thank you so much. I appreciate you. You know that I've talked extensively about how I need to FAFO, right? FAFO. I like to fuck around and find out about things and how I feel about things. And that's usually how I discover what I think, what I feel, whatever is I got to give it a shot. I got to experiment. I got to follow that impulse when I feel like lit up about something or like my inner teacher is giving me some guidance. I got to listen to it and just see. I often say, I won't know until I do it, taste it, see it, feel it, talk to that person, check it out myself. So this has been a really good experiment for me to take these 8 weeks, these 2 months or whatever off to see how it felt. And there were times in the beginning, it was wicked weird. And then I also noticed how I would see things out in the world or I would hear stories or whatever. And I would literally in my head go, I got to do a show about this. I got to do a podcast about this. And I was like, you're on break. You're taking a little sabbatical, a little pause. So I'm just so happy to be back. Thank you for being in the downtime zone with me. And I hope you're back and you're listening and you're as thrilled as I am to be here. So wicked excited to be here. Thank you so much. Okay. And then the other news before we dive in is I talked about in my last episode that I did before the break that when I came back, that we're going to be doing maybe some new things. And one of those things is I created a tip jar. I'm so proud of myself. I am not the most techie person at all. And I was like, I'm going to figure this out. So I just went and I went on the YouTube and I figured out how to do it. So if you are somebody who loves this show, if you find it helpful, if you find it beneficial in some way, if you just love it and you want to just tip a little bit or donate or whatever, a little bit of love, a little love donation from your heart to mine, I would be so grateful. Of course, obviously, just do what you can. Don't feel obligated. If anybody is going to put cash in the tip jar, I really want it to be coming from a place of love and not fear or guilt or weirdness or whatever. On my last episode, I talked about how I created a tip jar for my sweetie, who's a professional musician, my husband, Chris Lester. But I never did one for myself. Like I actually made him a physical one, right? We did that. And then he turned the tables on me one day and he said, look, what you put out in the world is just as valuable as my music. You should create one of those as well. And I'm like, I don't know how to do it electronically, but I figured it out. So you just go to Karen Kenney, Kenney, right? KarenKenney.com/tip jar, one word, and you'll be able to make a little donation if you want to. Okay. Now, thank you. Thank you for listening to all that. Now let's dive into this episode. I was a little torn about what I wanted to call this one. I had two great titles, but I think the one I'm going to stick with is simply I'm calling bullshit. First of all, because it makes me laugh. Also, it makes me laugh saying I'm calling bullshit while Bob Ross is behind me. And Mr. Rogers is back there too. Oh my gosh, is. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. I'm going to give you a couple of examples or a few examples of things that I have experienced lately, heard about that are just a little bullshitty. You know what I mean? That I'm just like, what is happening? So here's some examples of the kind of bullshit that either I have personally experienced or a friend has shared with me that they experience. Here's one. A friend of mine from my childhood, from Lawrence, goes in to get their car repaired. And when they go in, it is literally like the car repair people are making things up that are quote unquote wrong with the car. Double amen hands if you have ever experienced this yourself. Now, especially if you are of the female persuasion, right? A lot of times, car people think that you're stupid. Now, I'm lucky enough that I have had the same service advisor because I've only ever owned Toyotas, right? So I've had the same service provider for like 20 some odd, 25, I don't know, even now, 28 years, whatever it's been. So I'm lucky in that. And I trust my guy. Okay. Shout out to S2, Sean Snow. But a lot of people, right? They just use like a local garage or whatever. And I'm not, look, I'm, some of you will probably say, oh, they do that all the time at Toyota or Mazda. I don't know. I'm only telling you about my own experience. But my friend said they went in and they were just like trying to lob on these like phantom charges, and I was like, what is that about? Like, what makes you want to take advantage of your fellow brother or sister, like, or your fellow human being? Like, it's just not cool, like not cool. I'm like, I'm calling bullshit on that, right? And then, oh, here's another thing. So we were having some issues with the internet, right? With the interwebs, like our line wasn't consistent. And we called them and it wasn't on our end. We weren't doing anything wrong, right? It had to do with the modem or whatever the thing was. And they couldn't figure it out. They're like, we need to send a tech out. Okay, great. So they're like, they're going to come out between like this 4-hour chunk of time. And I'm like, great. I cancel my plans. I got to be at the house because obviously I use my internet to run my business and do things. And we wait and we wait and we wait. And as it's getting to the last few minutes of the 4-hour window, I'm like, this guy isn't coming. I'm like, nobody is coming to our house today. So of course I call them up and I get this whole rigmarole, this whole runaround about how, oh, the tech had an emergency and he had to go home. So immediately, right? Like, you're the asshole for getting your panties in a bunch about somebody having a family emergency. My big thing wasn't about him not showing up. It's the fact that, because life happens, I get it. It's that nobody bothered to tell me. So I sat around and wasted my whole day waiting for this person to come so that I could, let them in the house. People had to be here. It was just like, oh my God. I'm like, I'm calling bullshit on terrible, terrible customer service. Okay, here's another thing. When I was getting my septic pumped that sounds funny, doesn't it? Oh my God. Okay, pull it together. Pull it together. And we're back. I should say, when we were getting our septic pumped, the septic guy came out, and when they put the big hose in, and those of you who are on like city water, like you don't have wells, you don't have septics, you may have never experienced this before in your life. But when you have a well, right, and a septic tank, like the earth provides you its water, and you put it in a tank and all this stuff. You got to get that thing pumped out like every few years or whatever, depending on the size of your household. Okay. So while he's like, and I'm fascinated, I am fascinated by like so many jobs that I don't have. So of course I'm always out there watching everything that they're doing. So we're out there and he's got the big hose off the truck. It's like making all this noise and it's sucking up like all this stuff. And then they get these wicked long, like metal crowbar looking things. And they're like pushing down all the floaters, all the stuff that's down in the thing. I find the whole thing fascinating. So one of the things he says is he notices that there's like these roots and branches that I'm going to get to my point, but there's these roots and branches that are like we're growing into the septic. He's like, we got to take care of that, blah, blah, blah. And then he found this wet wipe, this white wet wipe attached to the thing. So, I have plumbers in the family. And one of the things that they have always told the women in the family is don't flush your tampons down your septic. If you have a septic, like it is so bad for the septic, it's going to clog it up. So you think like, okay, toilet paper can go down. And of course, those flushable, quote unquote, flushable wipes can go down there because it says so right on the package, right? Right on the package. It says approved for septic safety. Totally safe for your septic tank, right? You know what all the plumbers in my life tell me though? And I didn't know this until then. The guy doing the thing, he's like, those things, they're like, you want to pay us to come back because of all the damage it's going to do? He's like, don't use those. They're not flushable. I said, but it says right on the package. Me and my naiveness, right? My naivete. I said, it says right on the package. He goes, it's a lie. And I'm like, oh, liar, pants on fire. Shame on you, flushable Kleenex or whatever the company was. I was like, that's a lie. So here's a little PSA, a little public service announcement. Do not flush the quote unquote flushables down. The plumbers in your life will thank you. So no tampons, no pads, obviously, and no flushable wipes because it's a lie. It's bullshit. I'm calling bullshit on that too. Know what else I'm calling bullshit on? I'm calling bullshit on and I'm not naming names or like pointing anybody out, but I'm just calling bullshit on like coaches and programs and businesses that make these outrageous claims and then don't follow up. I know so many entrepreneurs who are so discouraged, feel defeated, feel downtrodden, right? All these D words, disappointed because they were sold a bill of goods. It was a racket. It was just their experience of that course, that coach, that program was a racket. And there's a lot of that going on out there. So you guys, I'm calling bullshit on some of that, and do your homework. Another little PSA. Do your homework before you give your hard-earned money or your easy-earned money, your resources to somebody. Do your homework, ask around, have a call, make sure it's a good fit, make sure that that there's a history there of good faith. You know what I'm saying? That's important. Last thing I'm going to call violence on just for today is violence. We are a world, I can't even say country, nation. We are a world of humans who are hell-bent on destroying each other. We are destroying our planet. We are destroying all the animals, the ecosystem, and each other. There is so much violence. And I'm not just talking about like the wars that are going on, the awful things that are going on where people and children and women are being raped and brutalized and murdered, and young men and like all this stuff. And, however you feel about Trump trying to kill another human being is just insane to me. It's just insane to me. I do not condone violence, especially as the kid of a murdered mother. I know the deep, I just know the deep impact. Like you can't take it back kind of impact that that kind of violence, that murder just has on not only a person, but a family, a community, and the people that are left behind. So, I just wanted to give you some examples of the things that I was calling bullshit on. And you maybe can check some of these boxes of what I said. Maybe you've had a service provided that was like, just not holding up their end of the bargain. Maybe you've dealt with a coach or somebody who really let you down and you like regret spending all that money and not getting what you thought you were getting, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing is that when we have multiple experiences or ongoing experiences of call it violence or bullshittery, when there is just so much bullshittery happening all the time, it can feel like, right? It can feel really easy to start to have a sense of like overwhelm or even slip into despair. And when we start to feel that way, when we start to feel overwhelmed or like in despair or like we're just consumed by all the awful, quote unquote, awful things that are happening in the world, all the terrible things where we don't feel like we know how to navigate, or we don't feel up to the task or up to the burden of trying to wade through all the shit. Here's one of the things that can happen, okay, is it can be so tempting to stay hyper-focused on the out there and everything that's happening out there in that world where we think that that is the cause right? That all of this bullshit is the cause of our suffering. This is something that we often experience, right? So much stuff is going on, and we just think, oh my God, the world is a shit show. There's so much crap going on, right? And we feel at the mercy of the world, and it feels like that's the cause, we're at the effect. When we start to get caught up in that POV, that point of view, what happens is we often will start to point fingers. We'll often start to say it's their fault, or it's that thing, or that company, that business, that president, that whatever, that political party, that whatever, right? Somebody outside of me is now responsible for how I'm feeling, right? And as soon as we do that, as soon as we start to point fingers and like assign blame and start to feel a little extra righteous, you know what I mean? We try to put the problem out there on them, like on other people. And when we start to do that, it's really easy, right? And who here, double amen hands, if you've known somebody who chooses or prefers to focus on everybody else's bullshit and what everybody else is doing wrong, mostly so that they don't have to look at their own stuff, right? We've all done it. We have all done it at some point. Got yourself a little project, right? Got yourself a little project, right? Whether that's a partner, a sweetie, a lover, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, whoever, that you can just be like, oh yeah, they're so, or you start looking at your family members, you start looking at everybody else but the mirror. You start looking everywhere else but except in the mirror. And what I like to do is, right, the one thing, because we can't control so much of what happens out there in the world. I'm going to talk about the things we can control in a moment, but there's so much quote unquote out there that we can't control. All we can control is ourselves. So for me, when I start to feel like the bullshit meters like the bullshit bucket's getting a little too full for my taste, one of the things I do is like, I don't want to feel helpless. I don't want to feel hopeless. I don't want to feel at the mercy of something outside of myself. So that is the perfect time to take a look at yourself, because this is how you actually change it. Remember at the beginning, I said, what do you do when you live in a world? Like, stay tuned to find out. I'm about to tell you, this is one of the things that you can do, is you start to turn the reflection on yourself. And it reminds me of a client that I once had who was in a relationship, and they were always like kind of passive aggressively, like complaining about the other, right? The other person, the other one. And eventually that relationship, no big surprise, failed. It fell apart, right? And so when everybody's playing the blame game, they've forgotten they're on the same team. You know what I mean? So as long as everybody insists on being right and making the other one bad or wrong and giving the ego that fix of like, yeah, I'm superior, I'm so special, whatever, that all leads to separation, which I'm going to talk about in another episode. But so no big surprise that relationship didn't make it, right? And there was a lot of this is not a condescending thing, a mean thing, a bad thing. I'm just saying, right? And I have said what I'm about to say to many people, so this isn't an identifier of anybody. But what happens is when a relationship ends and the other person is now no longer in the picture, what happens is, and I remember the conversation, and I remember them saying, well, all those things I used to complain about, whether it's like the house was never clean, or they're always leaving their stuff around, or they do this, they do that, they do this, right? They were kind of thinking about it, and they said, well, now I'm going to have a chance to, and they paused, and I said, find out how full of shit you really are. Right? Because when there's nobody else around to blame, what often happens is pretty quickly some other stuff starts to come into clear focus. And we start to realize that a lot of the stuff that we complain about, we are either complicit in or we are the cause of it. So when we're willing to take a look at our own bullshit, and that's what I always say, right? As a mentor, like, you got to be willing to own both your brilliance, like your brilliance, and your bullshit. Because if you don't look at that quote unquote shadow side, or that part of you that that is crying out for love or needs your attention, if we don't look at it, it's like a child, right? I know so many adults, it's like they're having a temper tantrum right now, right? It's kind of like the ego has a little temper tantrum when it's like looking out there and blaming everything on everybody else. Okay, we can't control what others do. We can't choose how they're being. We can't show, like we can't change who they're being. All we can do is ask ourselves, okay? And this is the key here. Listen up, listen up. This is the key. All we can do is ask ourselves, as we take a look around at all the bullshit and all the chaos and all the stuff that we don't want, we don't like, we don't prefer, but we find ourselves still experiencing. All we can do in that moment is ask ourselves, who am I being amongst all of this stuff? Who am I being amongst all of this bullshit, all of this chaos, all of this violence, all of this stuff that isn't working? Because that is the only thing that you really have any autonomy, authority, agency over. That's what you can actually change: your own mind, your own heart, your own thoughts, your own beliefs, your own stories, right? And when I say change our stories, it's not like we're going back and pretending that awful things didn't happen or that bad things didn't happen. When I say change your story, is we're going to change the meaning that we've assigned to it. And we're going to change the way that we look at ourselves in relationship to those stories, because it's so important that we go back and look at our own behavior and our own, again, complicitness and our own ways of showing up. And when we find ourselves steeped in a little too much bullshit, the question is, how much, I wrote this down so I don't forget. Here's the question to ask: am I contributing in some way? Am I contributing in some way to filling up that bullshit bucket? You know what I'm saying? What part of this is mine to own? And what can I do? And this to me is like where it actually gets really exciting and interesting. When things get really hard. Now, look, I have been going through my own season, trying to figure a few things out. None of us are exempt, right, from growth opportunities. Let me put it that way. None of us are exempt. So, and mine tend to be usually around like my business or my creativity and what I'm creating in the world and how I'm feeling, called to serve, or what I'm offering, all that stuff. So I've been in my own little season where I've been bumping up against myself and like trying to like stretch a little bit outside my comfort zone and take a look at some things. So in A Course in Miracles, right, I kind of think of it, there's this image that I often get when I think about A Course in Miracles. And I feel like, call it God, source, the divine, the universe, right? We have each been given our own individual curriculum. I'm going to do a whole podcast on that sometime. But we've given our own little part of the garden. We have been given like our own little corner of the garden to tend to. And if we're too busy looking out there at what everybody else is doing and all their bullshit, our own garden does not get like plowed, the seeds don't get planted, the weeds don't get plucked, and nothing grows there. And that's the place that we want to put our attention, in our own little corner of the garden. And maybe what you do in your little corner of the garden is you do your own spiritual work. You do your own personal development. You do your own mindset stuff. You do your own forgiveness, right? Your forgiveness work. That's a big one. That's a big one. I should do a series of podcasts on forgiveness, right? But that's the thing. When we find ourselves kind of like, chin deep in it, I can't change that some crazy person like, is out there shooting up little kids or going to malls or blowing up. Like, I can't control what so many other people are doing, but I can look at myself. I can look at the quality of my own thoughts. I can look at what's been in my mind, right? On my mind and in my heart lately. I can take a look and see if I need to clean up my side of the street, my backyard. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, take a look at like my little corner. And sometimes we'll be called to do things like go vote or volunteer or start a support group, or be a helper in some way, and that's always the next step, I say, when we think about Mr. Rogers. And Mr. Rogers' mom famously said to him, whenever big, scary things in the world happen, look for the helpers. And I'm like, that's great. Look for the helpers. Calm down your nervous system by knowing that there are people who are getting off their ass and doing stuff. But hey, you can also maybe become a helper. Take the next step and get involved and do something. So I always think, like, when we're looking out there and we're like, okay, there is so much bullshit out there. And one of the things that I realize is this: I can either go out there and bitch and moan and try to do like cancel culture and call people out and point fingers and name names and tell everybody how everybody's doing it wrong. Or here's the big takeaway. Here it is. Or you become the alternative to what's going on. So when the world is lost in a frenzy of fear, you become the love. That is the work. When everything is going crazy and the ego is shouting, fire, 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 fear, 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 right? Fight, fight, fight. This is when we draw on our own inner strength, which hopefully we are cultivating, right? Creating what Ashwaran, my teacher Ashwaran, calls a sanctum sanctorum, that place within you that cannot be shaken, that sturdy, steady place. Like, if you're watching this, you can see me, I'm doing my alignment, right? My alignment hands, right? The assignment is alignment, getting ourselves aligned through a DSP, a daily spiritual practice, so that we can tap into that well of love, that deep, deep, deep well of the truth of who we are, that well of love. Because that's what we're going to water our garden with. And that's what we're going to go next door and help our neighbors water some stuff with too, is that well of love is available to us. But we have to, like, do some things sometimes to remember, oh yeah, instead of looking at all the things out there I don't want, I can be the love that I want to see in the world, right? As Gandhi supposedly said, I can be the change that I want to see in the world. Because if we're just sitting around waiting for everybody else to change, we're going to be sitting here for a long ass time. Because not only do people often resist change, so does the brain. And most people who are walking around making decisions in positions of power and living in the world, they usually, this sounds kind of funny saying this because I'm being a little sarcastic, but they usually have a brain in their head. Whether or not they use it in service for the whole good, that remains questionable. But you certainly can do that yourself. Because here's the thing. One of the things that A Course in Miracles has really taught me is that projection, right? What you are projecting from your mind out onto the world is what you will see. Projection makes perception, okay? So another way of saying it from A Course in Miracles is the world is an outward picture of an inward condition. The world is what we think it is, what we project onto it. So when we want to change what's out there, less violence, more compassion, more kindness, more mercy, we wait a little more time before we start spewing quote unquote facts over the internet when awful things happen and everybody's rushing to be the first one with the news, right? It's like you just see such a lack of spiritual discipline online, in the news, on social media. People lack some basic spiritual chops, okay? So much of the work that I do, right, in the nest, in my one-to-one programs, when I teach yoga, anything that I'm doing, I'm trying to infuse it. That's what this whole show is about, telling stories that we can apply everyday spiritual principles to, right? I do some storytelling so we can relate it to our lives and say, hey, here are some spiritual principles, down to earth, applicable to those stories. If you found yourself, if you recognize yourself in this, right? Here's some stuff you can do to help. That's what this whole show is about, spreading more love in the world. And one of the ways that we can do that is to get our minds right. To get our minds right. To shift our minds from a thought system of fear to a thought system of love. How do I do that? And again, not hawking my wares, but it's honest. You do it by, you can come and join my group mentoring program, The Nest. It's $50 a month. You come in, it's like less than like a small dunks. I don't even know. It's like $1.50 a day, right? And you get to be in a group of change makers, of people who are trying to be better human beings and to nourish their spiritual selves. So we show up in the world differently, so that we become the alternatives. Like when you look at your family trauma, your family history, it's like you get to be the one that says, hey, this shit stops here with me. I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to become more self-aware. I'm going to take ownership of what I'm saying, what I'm thinking, what I'm doing, who I'm being, the choices that I'm making. I'm not going to pass the buck. I'm not going to keep blaming who I am today at 55 on my childhood. I'm going to choose, right, to become the alternative. You go to your job and everybody else is bitching and moaning, right? Be the alternative. Do it differently, right? Don't pass the buck. What's that saying? The buck stops here. I'm going to take responsibility. I'm going to show up a little early. I'm going to do my job to the best of my ability. I'm going to take pride in my work, etc., etc. Right? Because here's the thing. And I can hear, like in the back of my head, right? I can hear this little voice like, oh, I can hear somebody saying, so what do you mean? If it's projection makes perception, that you're saying I'm responsible for all that violence, I'm responsible for these awful things that happen in the world? Not you, maybe singularly, personally, okay? But all minds have joined. It's part of the collective consciousness. And let me give you an example to make my point, right? We look around the world. Now, you personally might not think that child sex trafficking is okay, or child pornography is okay, or starving children is okay, or abusing animals is okay, or, you know, the way that animals are, and hello, you know, my vegan heart, right? I find the way that animals are treated on this planet, it's disgusting and it's awful and it's horrible and it's brutal. And it breaks my heart, to be honest. Right? I'm always, it breaks my heart. Fact. Okay. So here's the thing. You might be thinking like, so I don't agree with so-and-so, you know, going through this thing, or I don't agree with hungry kids or da 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 da. Right. But enough people do. And that's what makes it possible out there, is that enough people in here, and I'm pointing to my head, my brain, enough people in here, in their minds, find that okay. And that's why it hasn't changed out there, because if enough people said enough is enough, it would change out there. If enough people align their minds with love and enough people said, I'm not okay with the unhoused, homeless, right, situations that we have. I'm not okay with the level of the, you know, whatever. When we see something that is predominantly, whether it's the way, whether it's a politician getting voted into office, or these things that we're just like, why is it that we're the only country that doesn't have like healthcare for all, right? Free healthcare, or university, like tuition free for all. When we see things on a major scale, it's because enough people are okay with it. Enough people have decided that it's not something that they want to change or think needs to change. And this is why it's so important that when you start to feel disgruntled and you feel your bullshit bucket getting really, really full, we have to ask ourselves questions. So whenever I see violence that I find disturbing, I always ask myself, where in me does violence still live? Where in me am I withholding love? Where in me am I holding a grievance? Where in me do I have any kind of violent thoughts? Now, violence isn't always like you're going to go and hit somebody or stab somebody or physically altercate somebody. But where have I been having attack thoughts? Where have I been having like really big judgments? Who am I not forgiving? Because those are the only things I can actually do anything about. So I often say to my clients and people in the nest and stuff, if we want to see a less violent world, we have to choose to be less violent in our own thoughts, words, and actions. One of the reasons why I'm vegan is because that is a powerful way for me to make a difference by not participating in the systems that keep animals in suffering, in rape, in slaughter, in the most abusive conditions, right? I make a difference by what I put on my plate and what I don't put in my mouth or in my body, what I don't wear on my body, what I don't wear on my skin, right? So there's all kinds of different ways. And if enough people do a little bit, a lot gets done. And that's how, right? That's how we push back against the bullshit, is that it has to be enough individuals to collectively make a difference. So the question isn't, well, what are they doing? And they did this. The question is, what am I doing? And how am I contributing to the bullshit? How am I contributing to the problem? Not in a guilty way, not to sit there and like beat yourself up so you go into shame and regret and blame. That I'm not saying that. It's taking an honest look and saying like, yeah, I haven't been very kind lately, right? My thoughts have not been on the bright side of life lately or whatever, right? We have to take a look inside. We get to become the alternative to all the fear, because that's all that violence and all the bullshit and all the lazy, all the stuff that we see that we're like, what the, all the chaos. That is the playground of the ego, right? And our job is to align ourselves more fiercely than ever with conviction, with faith, with conviction, right? With love. That's how things are going to change. And I often say, like, I don't know if I'm going to be around to see, I think, I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but, Martin Luther King Jr., who says, that the arc of justice, right? It bends. The arc bends towards justice. And I'm just hoping, because I have great nephews. I have, nephews. I have people in my life who are having babies, and I'm like, I want the world to be a better, more beautiful, more kind and merciful and compassionate place. And, I'm 55. I don't know how much longer I'll be around. So hopefully the world, I mean, I just think like, man, we've got to do our part. So if you are, tempted, whenever you're tempted to kind of focus on everybody else's bullshit, this is when we can take a look in the mirror. I call it taking a look in the soul mirror and just really being, as they say in 12-step programs, they say, like, take a fearless moral inventory. And that to me is one of the best things that we can do. And when you start to recognize like, oh yeah, there's some places in my life where I'm a little full of shit, where I say I want to do a thing, or I say I want this, but I actually don't take any of the steps to make it happen. Right. Because it's really easy. This is a whole other podcast for another day. It's really easy to say that you want the thing without doing the work to actually get the thing or be the thing. So you guys, I hope this was helpful in some way. I hope that you are envisioning in your mind your own little corner of the garden and what that looks like for you. And it might be your home, it might be your family, it might be your workplace, it might be, if you are an entrepreneur, like your business and how you serve the world. It's yours to tend to. And things grow, trust me, things grow in a much better environment of love than they do in fear. So I hope this is helpful in some way. I am so happy and delighted. I'm a little bit giddy, to tell you the truth. I'm so happy to be back. It feels like coming home, like in the best way. So thank you so much for being here. My sweetie and I might be playing around with the intro, so stay tuned for that. I don't know if it's going to happen on this episode or another one. I just am like, yeah, I just want it to be more simple and fun and easy, and to really represent like me and my personality and how I feel about things. So we might tweak that sucker too. But look, if you feel like you got something beneficial from this episode, that there's somebody in your life you think who could, it would be good for them to hear this. Maybe they've been a little down in the dumps of how things have been. Share this. That's a great way of spreading love, is share this with somebody that you care about, somebody you love, somebody that you're thinking of, somebody who you just think might enjoy it, whatever, right? Somebody who's got long car rides and they could do some easy listening on their car rides. Sharing the show is one of the great ways to help spread more love. And if you want to try out the new tip jar, I'm not going to stop you. I'd be wicked happy. So just remember, go to KarenKenney.com/tip jar. We'll see what happens. I'm playing with it. I'm doing an experiment. But some of you may remember from my last episode that one of the reasons why I took a hiatus is that, I, for a long time, had a producer that I paid to do the show. And over the last 5 years, I've chipped out like quite a bit of cash, like over $25,000. And so I was like, okay, we're going to hit pause and we're going to find some ways to maybe support the show. So if your heart feels called to support the show and what I'm doing and what I'm trying to do in the world by spreading more love, I would be so grateful. So just thank you so much for that. Okay, you guys, wherever you go, keep your eyes on your own paper, right? It's tempting to look out there, but wherever you go, okay, may you leave the people, the animals, the places, the environment, the world better than how you first found it. Wherever you go, may you and your presence and your energy be a blessing. Bye.